Hello everybody, this is AK. I'm back. So three things to talk about in this video. Number one, DBS posts 18% jump in Q3 profits, beating estimates. Yeah, this is a very nice surprise, very good results. And if you remember, I made a recent video on why I was looking to increase my investment in DBS vis-a-vis my investments in UOB and OCBC. And if you haven't seen that video yet, I'll leave a link to that video in the description box below. And I said, I asked the question why DBS is able to trade at such a rich premium to its book value compared to OCBC and UOB. Right, and I said that answer lies in its ROE, return on equity, and how it's able to consistently deliver much higher ROE compared to UOB and OCBC, right, consistently. And of course, this 18% jump in Q3 profits, really stunning. And when compared with UOB, you know, UOB saw Q3 core net profit increasing 5%. 5%. So like 18% is almost 4 times more than 5%. So I mean, UOB is a nice and strong bank, but DBS performance is simply stunning, right? So that's point number one. Point number two, I'm going to talk about the T-bill auction that's coming up, right? It's coming up in what, a couple of days. Yeah, it's happening on the 8th of this month, so it's 2 days away from now. And I've just placed my application this morning, non-competitive bid using cash, right? So for those of us who are using our CPF OA money and we are placing competitive bid, like I say, I've said this before, if you are using CPF OA money, we should place competitive bid and not take a chance with non-competitive bidding. And I also made a video on that. I'll leave a link in the description box below to that video if you have not seen it. And as usual, I look at the daily SGS prices published by the Monetary Authority of Singapore. And if we look at the T-bill which is maturing, say in April 2024, that is currently trading at a yield of 3.88% per annum. 3.88% per annum. So this 6 months T-bill auction that's coming up will mature on the 14th of May. So there's not quite, it's not that far away from 23rd April. It's like 14th of May, so just a few weeks apart. So I expect this T-bill auction cutoff yield sensibly should have a cutoff yield at around 3.88 or 3.9% per annum, thereabouts, right? It shouldn't be too far away, right? But of course, we could get a nice surprise to the upside and get 4%. Who knows? Who knows? Crossing fingers that sanity would prevail, right? And we don't get too many low ballers, right? Because it is the first auction of the month, and chances are we will have more people with CPF OA money trying their luck, right? So the next thing, point number 3 that I want to talk about is a long winter in China markets and US recession. Of course, we are always talking about global economy now, even though there's a lot of talk about decoupling and how US companies are doing reshoring, right? So you used to be doing offshoring, and now they are bringing manufacturing back to the US and all that kind of thing, and how there could be more decoupling in the future. And it's still a global economy, right? There's still a lot of interconnectivity. We can't totally decouple from each other, especially not for Singapore, right? So now they're talking about big funds are talking about gearing up for a long winter in China markets. Of course, we know that China is having problems, and I've made videos about this before, right? And to be fair, a lot of it was very speculative, right? Valuations were sky high at one time, right? When, like growth stocks like Alibaba was trading at $300 per share, and or tech stocks, to be more accurate, even like Tencent was trading at very high valuation. And I remember friends telling me that, when it comes to growth stocks, right, tech stocks is different. It is normal for them to trade at very high PE ratios. But of course, now we know Uncle Warren Buffett is right? And interest rates work like gravity. When interest rates were zero, PE ratio could be sky high. And that's the reason why tech stocks and growth stocks had high PE ratio, and that's because interest rates were zero, right? But now that interest rates have gone up so much, gravity has become a lot stronger, and PE ratio has become more reasonable, right? So it's not because growth stocks are allowed to have high PE ratio, it's because zero interest rates allow them to have very high PE ratio. So now people who are very bullish on China have to accept that China prospects have fallen flat, right? And big investors have turned very cautious because China is facing multiple headwinds, and they don't seem to be going away. And in the news, the news reported this, that it was supposed to be a year that China's economy roared back to life, 2023. And but 10 months into 2023, the reality is very different. Chinese stocks are among the world's worst performers, and investors are pulling money out of the country at the fastest pace since 2015. And the Chinese renminbi is hovering around a 16-year low. The real estate crisis is rippling through the wider economy, and it has cancelled out any momentum gain from pandemic reopening, right? So this is something that I've constantly talked about, and that's how we have to be very realistic and not be overly optimistic about China. But at the same time, don't be so pessimistic to think that China is going the way of the dodo. It's the world's second largest economy, right? Just like people for a long time before China was saying that Japan would be going the way of the dodo, but it's still the world's third largest economy, right? It's not going to disappear overnight. And I believed China will recover. It has a lot of resources at its disposal. I've talked about this in a recent video as well. Well, but how is all of this going to affect Singapore, right? But of course, China is a big trading partner for Singapore, so it's going to have ripple effects, and it's going to affect Singapore, especially Singaporean companies which have exposure to China. That's for sure, right? So that can't be helped. And then separately, we also have to keep an eye on the US economy, and we have to worry about that as well, because recession concerns in the US have been growing, right? And it's not something new as well. It means rising interest rates, and there's a lot of market uncertainty, right? And many analysts will believe a recession is coming in 2024, right? I talked about this in the recent video, in the last video, in fact. And one worrying sign is that household debt in the US has surged to a record $17 trillion, $17 trillion US dollars. And this is like up by 20% year on year. And it's driven primarily by rising interest rates that impacted household budgets. So US households have had to borrow. They have to borrow, right? Credit cards, overdrafts, what have you. And the household debt has reached a record high, right? And this is surely a bad sign, okay? And so in the last video, I talked about how higher interest rates will have negative impact on corporate balance sheets, and it's also, of course, having a negative impact on consumers' balance sheets, right? Individual balance sheets. we talk about how we should invest in companies with strong balance sheets. We also want to make sure that our own balance sheets are strong in order to weather whatever storm that might be coming in 2024. Right. Citibank predicts a looming recession in 2024. In fact, they think it's in early 2024. Right, and it's based on the unemployment rates and several other factors, and suggests a potential downturn very soon. All right, US isn't currently in the recession. It's just like how Singapore isn't currently in the recession. But like PMD says, there are signs of sluggishness in Singapore's economy. So things are not in a good place, right? And this is why many experts are also thinking that interest rates are coming down next year. Even though Fed Chair Jerome Powell said recently that the committee has not begun considering a rate cut, and that they will not consider a rate cut unless inflation is brought under control, which by their definition is 2% per annum. And of course, there are some way off 2% per annum. They're still quite much higher right now in inflation. But will the Fed really stick to this? And this means inflation stays high, they will not cut interest rates, even if there's a recession? I don't think so. I think it makes sense for them to accept the fact that inflation, normalized inflation might not be 2% anymore in today's world, where supply chain has been hugely disrupted, and where onshoring has increased cost of production in the US, right? And there's all this talk about national security, and all this is going to increase costs, right? And you're not going to see 2% inflation rate anytime soon. I think the sensible thing is to accept that it's going to be like 3% or maybe a bit higher, and that's the normal. That's the new normal. If a recession comes and they don't reduce the cost of funding and they keep interest rates high, it's going to send global economy, many economies in the world, into stagflation. So, but that's just me talking to myself. I don't know. I'm no expert, right? So let's see what happens, right? If AK can talk to himself, so can you. Bye-bye.